Good morning and welcome back. As you know, today we are trying to develop our first mobile application, and in particular we are targeting Android platforms. So we are trying to develop a real-world mobile application for Android. In order to use the same building blocks that we have seen so far, we are using an online platform which is called AppInventor. In order to gain access to this tool, you need to go to this link, which is the one that I'm highlighting right now. So it's ai2.appinventor.mit.edu. So please open your browser and input this string, this URL into the address bar. You are asked to log in using your Google account. So I know that you already have your own Google accounts, so you can log in using your accounts and then allow the application to use it. Your account will be used just to allocate some storage space for you into the MIT servers in order to store your applications and make it possible for the platform to manage your projects. So at some point you get to this page, which is already opened on my screen, and in my personal space you find several previous projects, while if this is the first time you access to AppInventor, you won't find any previous project in your personal space. But what you have to do is to go here to click on projects and then select my projects in order to gain access to this page. And under the projects, you find also a new project, which is the command that we are issuing right now. And as we press on start a new project, then a pop-up window appears that asks us to input the name of the new project. And we will call this project Translate. So please write the name of the project into this pop-up window and then click on OK. Now, this is the main panel that allows us to design our application. And the white rectangle that you find here represents the screen of a mobile phone, of a smartphone. And this means that we are assumed to design the interface of the application on this screen. Then once we have added all the interface elements that we need, we will switch to another panel, which is called the blocks, which will allow us to implement the functionalities. So these two panels here, designer and blocks, allows us to design the interface and define the functionalities associated with them. So let me first show you how to add interface elements to this screen. So as you can see, you have a palette to the left, and the palette contains all the interface elements that this tool provides. And there are many of them that you usually find in your mobile applications when you just use them as an end user. But right now, you are playing the role of a developer. So you are able to choose whatever interface element you need and to drag and drop it into the interface. So let me start, for instance, with a button. You see, I have just dragged the button into the interface and the button appears in the white rectangle which represents the interface of my mobile phone. Before going ahead, I want to show you how to test on the fly your application on your mobile phone. To this purpose, you need to go to the Connect menu and you find several options here. Let me start by clicking on Emulator to see what happens. You see, this small window appeared that looks like a smartphone, actually an old-fashioned smartphone, and it takes just a few seconds to show up. And right now, I can open it and I have to wait a few more seconds in order to allow this emulator not only to behave as a smartphone, but to preview the application that we are developing. So in practice, what is going to happen is that in the screen of this mobile phone emulator, the interface that we are designing here will appear pretty soon, in just 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds. Here we are. And here is our button. You see, so what's nice is that in this emulator, we can see exactly what we are doing in the interface. So let me see if it works if I change something here. For instance, let me add another interface element, which is a text box. I take it from here and I drop it here, and here it is. So as you can see, it appeared in the emulator of the smartphone as soon as I dropped it in the designer. Let me add another interface element, which is a label. And here is the label. So the application that we are trying to develop is an application that will manage text. In particular, it will allow us to input some text and then to translate it in a different language with respect to the one in which it was inputted. So let me show you how to change the layout and the position of the interface elements in the screen. So if I want, for instance, to put the label on the top, I can just click here, drag it, and drop it here. Then I want to place the label on top, and there is the effect. And the same happened in the emulator. As you can see here, you have a list of all the components, which is a hierarchy list, in the sense that the top level is the screen, and then we have 3 elements which are included within the screen. And as for the screen, let me change the title, which is the one which appears here, and let me call it translator. Okay, now the title changes here and here. Then I can change other properties, and the properties are all listed here. Those are static properties in the sense that I can set them once and for all in my application. And for instance, I can change the horizontal alignment, saying that I want all the interface elements to be centered in the screen, and this is the effect. and this is the effect on the real world application. Okay. Now, the emulator that I'm showing here is just one of the ways that we have to test our own application. But what is nice is that we can even test the application in real time in our own smartphones. And to this purpose, we need to press AE companion, and the companion is a companion application that you need to install on your mobile phones. So you need to go to the Google Play Store and look for AI2 companion and have the application installed on your smartphone in order to be able to connect your smartphone to the platform in order to test what you are doing in real time. But instead of doing so, I need to use the emulator, because otherwise you won't be able to see on my screen what I'm doing. And the other way you have to test your application is to build it and install it as a full-fledged application on a real device. To this purpose, you have to go to the build menu and either ask the server to build the application and to provide a QR code to possibly install it directly on your smartphone by by capturing the barcode, or otherwise you can save the application, which is called APK, on your computer. Let me choose this option here. So I'm going to build the application. And to have it downloaded on my computer. Here is the application. And the reason why I'm doing so is because I want to use another emulator, which is much bigger than this one, which is this one. So this is an emulator which behaves exactly as a smartphone, and the advantage of this one with respect to the smaller one is that it is bigger. So it allows us to share the screen in a much more effective way. And in order to test our application on this emulator, I have to drag and drop the APK file on it. And you see, here is the effect. And this looks exactly as it would look on a real device, because this is exactly the emulator of real-world devices. In particular, this is the emulator of a Motorola Moto X smartphone. Okay, now that we have understood how we can test in real time our applications, please notice that there is a difference between what you can do with the connect menu and what I've just done using the build menu. Because the connect menu actually creates a connection between either an emulator or your companion application in order to allow you to synchronize with the platform to test the changes that you make on the application in real time, while the build menu allows you to actually build a real-world application which is based on the status of the development at the time in which you decide to build it. So this means that once you have an APK and you install it on your own devices, then that APK will behave as a real-world application which is completely independent from the development platform. to show you what I mean, please let me go back to the small emulator and change something. For instance, I could change the size of this text window here, and if I go here, text box, I can edit the properties, and among the properties I find width and height. So I can say that I want this window to be 200 pixel high, and this is the effect. This is also the effect on the emulator, which is connected to the platform, while there is no effect of this change on the big emulator in which I installed the application. Because the application that I installed is a previous version, the version that I downloaded on my computer. Okay? So, having this in mind, we will keep using both this small emulator to see a preview of the changes in real time and this bigger emulator to emulate what we will do on our own devices once we have finished developing the application. Okay, now let's start developing the application. So the button and the interface elements that I already added to the interface are more or less sufficient to allow us to input a text, but we need to change the name of the labels in order to make them more significant. So let me keep it here, and for instance, I want to rename this label in this label, this label here in input your text here. Okay, and this is the change. Then I want also to change the text associated with the button, because this is a button that I want the user to press in order to submit the text that was inputted in the text box. So I call it just submit. And there is our interface. Then I want to show you that there are some other changes to the interface that I want to make by coding rather than by setting the properties here. In particular, notice that if I want to specify the size of this text window here, I can do it using just the pixels as the units. But since our application will possibly run on many different devices, I don't know a priori how wide the screen will be, because the width of a screen depends on the mobile device that you are using. So instead of using pixels as a unit, I would like to define the size of the window as a portion of the actual screen of the device in which the application will be run. And this is something that can be done by coding rather than by designing the interface statically. So let me go to the block editor, which is the section in which we will be able to write our code, to see what we can do here. First of all, notice that we have some blocks here which are just categories of blocks. So if I click on some of them, on each of them, then the specific blocks appear, and as you can see, they look like the ones that we found on the hour of code when we had to play with a labyrinth. Okay, so what's nice about this tool is that it allows us to develop real-world application using the same visual programming tools that are used for teaching purposes. So you do not need to know the syntax of any programming language, while you will just focus on what you want to do and to compose a puzzle of blocks in order to actually implement it. So I was mentioning that using code, we would be able to change the size of the text box. So let me go to the text box, and as you can see, there are specific blocks which refer to the text box, and that allows us to set the properties of the text box dynamically. Then there are also other blocks associated with the screen. So let me, for instance, take one of these blocks, like this one. When screen 1 initialize do. What does it mean? It means that the blocks that will be inserted within this block will be executed the first time the screen is initialized, which means the first time the application is launched. Here I can say that I want to change the size of the text box, and in particular I could say that I want this text box to have a specific width and a specific height, and I use set text box width and set text box height to this purpose. Now, instead of specifying the width and the height statically, I want to specify them as a fraction of those of the screen. So I need to get, instead of setting, I need to get the size of the screen, which is this one and this one. And what is nice is that these two values depend on the device in which the application will be executed. Then I go to the Math menu, and I take this block here, which is a multiplication, so I can compute a product. And here I say that I want the width of the text box to be equal to the width of the screen multiplied by a number which is 0.8. So this means that the text box will take just 0.8 times the width of the screen. So this means that if I put it set it to 1, this would fill in the entire screen. If I specify 0.5, this will become 1/2 of the screen. Specifying 0.8, this will be something in between. Okay? Now notice that nothing is changing right now here. Do you know why? This is just because the changes that I made will become effective only when the screen initializes. And since the screen here was already initialized because the application is already open in this screen, these instructions have not been executed so far. Let me go to the screen menu and see if I can change something, or instead of going to the screen menu, let me go to the button 1 menu and take this one. When button 1 click here, and right now what I assume to happen is that if I click on the button, then this instruction will be executed. Let's see if this is true. So I click on submit, and as you can see, now the text box is wider just because this instruction has been executed. So let me do the same for the height. For the height, I want to duplicate this because this makes it faster to re-implement it. And to this purpose, I select this and I press control associated with C, and then control associated with V in order to duplicate it. Or otherwise, I can right-click on it and select duplicate, and this is the effect. Okay? So now I want to put it here and to specify, here I want to specify height instead of width. Instead of 0.8, I set, for instance, 0.7. Once again, this is not producing any effect on the running application because this is executed only once and for all. But if I copy and paste it here under this other condition, then by clicking on submit, here is the effect. Okay? So what we have seen is that code can be used even to change the interface. But then we need to implement more interesting functionalities because we want our application to be able to translate the text that we input. So to this purpose, we need to add other functionalities to our application, which involve other interface elements. In particular, I go to the media panel here, and as you can see, there are many other interface elements which appear. And in particular, I take two elements from this menu. One of the elements is a text-to-speech element, and the other one is called Yandex Translate. So these two elements, as you can see, are classified as non-visible components. In fact, that they will be used to add other interface functionalities which are non-visual. In particular, the capability of translating something and the capability of pronouncing a text are capabilities which have nothing to do with the appearance of the screen. So that's why they do not appear within the white rectangle, but just below, and they are labeled as non-visible components. Then there is another component that I want to add, taken from the sensors menu. And this component is the accelerometer. This is another non-visible component because this allows us to gain access to the accelerometers of our smartphone. The accelerometers are the ones, they are the sensors that allow our smartphone to be sensitive to shakings or to changes in the orientation and so on. And I will show you in a moment why I want to play today with these three elements. So let's go back to the block menu and try to write some code. So I have to reduce a little bit the size of the blocks. I do it by pressing Ctrl and minus in order to make it possible for more blocks to fit into the screen, into the shared screen. So I used this when button one click just to make these changes effective in the preview. But the button will not be used to change the size of the text box. Instead, it will be used to input a text. So let me show you how this can be done. So first of all, I need to initialize a variable. A variable is just a memory element which allows us to keep in memory something. And initializing it means that we will define a variable by associated a name with it, and then we initialize it to either an empty value, a null value, or an initial value which has to be used to some purpose. So let me call it text, because this variable will be used to keep in memory the text that is inputted by the end user. And then I initialize it to a text which I can take from this menu here, which is a default text, like, for instance, please enter some text and submit it. Okay, so this means that this text will be used if no other texts have been inputted by the end user. But as soon as some text is inputted and button 1 is pressed, then I want this variable to take the value of the text inputted by the end user. So to this purpose, I go to the variables and I use a set instruction, which allows me to change, which means to set the value associated with this variable here. And then here I need to specify which is the new value that I want this variable to take. And the variable has to take the value which is associated with the text box. And as we go into the text box menu, we find a lot of properties that can be either set or got. And in particular, if I take this one represents the text that has been inputted by the end user here. So let me put it here. Now, if I go here and write some text, for instance, hello, then this text can be inputted just by pressing submit. Apparently, nothing has happened, but instead, what happened is that this variable now contains the word hello instead of the word please enter some text and submit it. Now I want to do something else, which is reset the text once it has been inputted. So if I wrote some text into this text box and then I submitted it, I want the text box to be emptied in order to be ready to receive a new text. So to this purpose, I go again into the text box menu and I set its content to null. And there is the effect. Now, if I submit this word, the word disappears. But instead of making it just disappear, I want it to be kept just as a hint, just as something which is, let me say, that is shown behind the text box. Exactly as right now, the hint for text box 1 writing appear here. And to this purpose, I can find a set text box 1 hint, and I can set it to the value of the global variable called text. And I want to do it also for the first time, because if I do it this time, this means that when I initialize the screen, then the hint, instead of being a hint for textbox 1, will be please enter some text and submit it. While right now what happens is that if I write here, hello, my name is Alessandro, and then I submit it, then as you can see, the hint becomes hello, my name is Alessandro. Okay? Now it's time to try to translate it. But in order to translate it, I wanted to do something which is pretty funny. First of all, I needed to specify which are the languages that I want to use. And to this purpose, I defined two new variables, one which is called H language, and the other one which is called V language. H stands for horizontal and V stands for vertical. And I call them in this strange way because I want my smartphone to translate the message if I change the orientation of the smartphone. The orientation means, let me show it here, that I can use the smartphone either in this way, which is called vertical or portrait, or in this way, which is called landscape or horizontal. Okay, so what I mean is that using our accelerometers, which provide information about the actual orientation of our screen, I want my text to appear in a language or in a different one, depending on the fact that I keep my smartphone vertical or horizontal. Okay, so let's see how to make it possible. So I have to make my application sensitive to the orientation, and I can go to the screen menu and use this block here. So I found it here, which is when screen 1 screen orientation changed, then here I want to put a condition which is an if with an else. And the condition is the one which allows me to check for the actual orientation. And depending on the actual orientation, I want to translate the message either in a language or in another one. So which are the two languages and how to specify them? For instance, I want my default language, which is the vertical one, to be English, which is the language that we are using together, and my other language to be Italian. And you can specify a different language. So please specify English as a common language for the vertical orientation, and choose your own language for the horizontal orientation. The list of languages and the labels to be used will be provided later on. Right now, let me keep working with Italian, but there are a lot of different languages in which translation can be done, and I hope that all of your native languages are all represented. But we have to double check it. I'm not so sure, but I hope so. Okay, now let me try to specify the condition which has to be checked to understand how the smartphone is oriented. So what I need now is the accelerometer sensor, and in the accelerometer sensor I find these two instructions which provide readings of the accelerations on the X and Y axis. And since acceleration and accelerometers are sensitive to gravity, what happens is that comparing the two components of the acceleration, I will be able to understand how the smartphone is oriented. And in particular, I use a math function, which is a comparison between X and Y components to see if the smartphone is vertically or horizontally oriented. Then I want also to translate the message, and to this purpose I use this other component which has been added to the interface, and in particular use this core to a specific translation service. And I have to specify which is the language I want the message to be translated into. And to this purpose, I specify the vertical language here, and which is the text, which is this one. Then I do the same by duplicating the entire block here, in case the orientation is the other one. And the only difference here is that I specify the H language. So I ask the translator, the translation service, to use the H language instead of the vertical language. Okay, translation services are external services provided by Android. So those are just the invocations to the services, but they do not provide an answer in real time. So what I need to do is to make my application wait for the actual translated text to be ready. And to this purpose, I have to use this one. When Yandex Translate one got translation, then this is what I need to do. Okay? And notice that if I take this one, then I find two parameters which are available within this block, and translation is the parameter that we need. So let me take, actually, sorry, not take, but define another variable which is called translated text. We can initialize it to nothing, to an empty string, and then I set this within this block, taking the text returned by this function here. So just to make it clear, when I change the orientation of the screen, depending on the orientation, I call an external service asking for a translation. And when the translation is ready, this instruction will be executed. Okay? And then I want also this instruction to take some effect. And to this purpose, I can, for instance, duplicate this instruction here in order to make the translated text appear as a hint. Okay, let me see if it works. So right now, instead of just using this small emulator here, I want to build the application to make it work on a real-world device. Okay, while waiting for the application to be built, I invite you to see if you have a barcode reader on your device, because if you have one, you can build it in a different way. Let me show you. So first, let me try the new version of the application on the emulator, and then I'll show you something else, how to test it on your device. Okay, as you can see right now, all the changes that we made appear also on the big emulator, because we rebuilt the application. So this is the latest version of the application. Now I can put here some text. Hello, my name is Alessandro, and submit it. Now what I can do is to change the orientation of the screen and see what happens. As you can see, right now, the application speaks Italian rather than English, while if I change the orientation again, the string is translated back into English. Pretty nice, isn't it? So this means that you can have some text inputted in a given language, and when you change the orientation of the screen, the text is automatically translated. Okay, I noticed that when the screen appears in this orientation, the size of the text box is actually the height is is too big, because it exceeds the height of the screen. So what we need to do is to adjust it by replicating these instructions even within the orientation change. So we can change the property of the text box whenever the orientation changes. But before finishing our application, I want to add another functionality, because as you probably remember, we added another component which is called text-to-speech to the interface, and this component was not used so far. So right now I want to use it in order to make my application speak. And to this purpose, I need to provide some additional inputs in order to decide when to make it speak. And I need also to use some of the functionalities which are provided within this panel here. So in particular, I need for sure this one, which is a text-to-speech, where I can put a text here and then have my smartphone pronounce it. And then I want also to specify when to pronounce this message. So for instance, I could add this here and to use the translated text as a text to be pronounced. So let's see what's the effect. And to this purpose, I need to rebuild it. So as I mentioned, if you have a barcode or QR code reader, you could do it in this way. Instead of downloading the application on your computer, you can ask for the MIT server to build the application for you and to just make it available at a given URL, which is provided as a QR code. So in a few seconds, the QR code will appear, and if you capture the QR code with your own smartphone, then you will be able to install the application directly on your smartphone. I'm doing it right now, and you can do the same. You can, for instance, take it even from my screen, because the application is available online, and you have to force your smartphone to install it, possibly violating something of the security settings of your smartphone, because you know that the application is safe because we developed it together, but it is not distributed through the Google Play Store, and this is why it is not considered to be safe. Then if you open the application, you will see it, and you can try to use it on your smartphone. I'm doing it right now on my smartphone. Okay, so this is what I did on my smartphone, and as I changed the orientation, the string was translated and pronounced. So let me see what happens if I build it here and I test it on our emulator. Just a few more seconds. Okay, here it is. Okay, this should be the new version. Let me see. Yeah. I hope you heard it pronounce the default text. I submit it, and if I rotate it, as you probably noticed, right now the text has been translated and the smartphone tries to pronounce it. But if I rotate it, okay, the pronunciation in this case is reasonable, while if I change the orientation and translate to Italian, the pronunciation is not reasonable at all, because the default language of the translator is the default language of your device. So we need to align the language of the translator to the actual language of the, sorry, not of the translator, but of text-to-speech component to the actual language of the text. So to this purpose, here you can find that there is a set language, and we need the language to be set to the same language that is used here. And since the language depends on the orientation, the best place where to put this instruction is within the if statement, in order to use a setting which is coherent with the translation of the text. Okay, so right now the language of the text-to-speech component is coherent with the actual version of the text. And there is just one more thing that I want to show you. Instead of making it pronouncing the translated text whenever we rotate our smartphone, I want to show you something that I cannot demonstrate on the emulator, but that can make the application more amusing on your real-world devices, which is this one. When accelerometer sensor 1 shaking. This is something which detects the fact that you shake your smartphone. And I want this action to trigger the text-to-speech component. So this means that if we just rotate the smartphone, the text will be just translated without being pronounced, but then if you shake your smartphone, then the text will be also pronounced in the proper language. Okay, so that's it for today. I will build the application for you and make available online both the final application and the project. So in case you wasn't able to follow all the steps on your own computer and on your own space, on working space on AppInventor, you will be able to then import the project from the file that I will share. To this purpose, I'll show you that there is an import and export command here. So the file that I will make available online is a .aia file, which is an AppInventor project. And this AppInventor project can be imported in order to have in your own working space exactly the project as it looks in my working space. Okay, so to this purpose, I will export the project from my space and make it available online for you. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this first tutorial in which we end up developing a pretty funny and useful application. This is just a very first step toward the application of full-fledged mobile applications, but toward the development of full-fledged mobile applications. But as you probably have understood, there are great potentials that can be fully exploited using this development tool, which is provided by MIT. Okay, thank you very much and see you next time.